Welcome to my review of Aftermath, Star Wars Aftermath to be specific. Written by Chuck Wendig, Aftermath was of course the first book in a trilogy, because why make dollars when you can make 3 times dollars? Thank you, Star Wars. And Aftermath was first published in 2015. The gist of the story is that some of the more senior surviving Imperials are meeting up to figure out what exactly makes up the chain of command in the Empire now that the Emperor and Vader are both dead. The highest ranked people in attendance are a Moff, who has promoted himself to Grand Moff, and an Admiral. It seems like in a galaxy as vast as we've seen, taking it in the colossal distances, suggested that none of these people would actually be top of the tree anyway. Where are all the non-self-promoted Grand Moffs? Anyway, they decide to meet on an outer rim planet called Akiva. In the meantime, Nora, a rebel veteran of the battle over Endor, has returned to Akiva to meet her son Temin. They cross paths with Jas, a bounty hunter, and Sinjir, a former Imperial officer now content to be a drunk and a drifter. Now, Jas recognises the value of some of the Imperials present by virtue of having a deck of cards with their pictures in them, a horribly meta device which immediately brings to mind the real-life Iraq conflict. Temin and the others try to infiltrate the Imperial Palace. They're taken prisoner, they escape, various stuff happens, but the whole thing is just, unfortunately, stupefyingly lazy and unforgivably smug. The isolated, insignificant world, the low ranks of the assembled Imperials, combined with the everyday workmen heroes, it really makes this seem like the stakes couldn't be any lower. Further, Wendig intersperses his story with a brief interlude every chapter or so, breaking what little flow or tension he's actually created. These interludes serve no purpose beyond indicating the state of the wider galaxy and perhaps drawing on a sense of nostalgia, if it is in fact even possible to feel nostalgia for places like Naboo and Taris. If you're buying this book to find out what Han and Luke did next, you're going to be disappointed. Han and Chewie appear in one of these interludes for a couple of pages, and none of the old guard other than that appears at all. 2 fringe characters from the original trilogy do feature. The first is Wedge, who is taken prisoner early on and hardly appears in any worthwhile or meaningful way after that. The second is Admiral Akbar, who Wendig tells us is a great leader, but shows us instead a leader terrified of being drawn into another trap and is thus rendered ineffectual. However he dresses this up, it is clearly little more than Wendig explaining away a New Republic in action that would otherwise be inexplicable. Wendig presents his work almost entirely in the present tense, perhaps a remnant of his history as a screenwriter. This is not completely unheard of in literature, though it remains unusual enough to be striking. It would be interesting to see in more skilled hands if this method might make it easier to generate a sense of the now, achieving an extra level of urgency. Obviously, we've all read novels written in the past tense that achieve that ably anyway. And here, instead of heightening that sense of pace, the entire book does feel rather pedestrian. The main contributing factor to this is Wendig's breathtaking arrogance. This is a narrative voice unlike any I've ever experienced before, particularly presented in a heterodiegetic way. Wendig mumbles, mansplains and pontificates his way through 360 odd pages, and there isn't a single one of those pages that doesn't positively drip in a cloying, skin-crawling smugness. For example, just about every page will feature a passage in brackets. Here are a couple of examples. It's worth, while these are on screen, just observing the page numbers. This small sample should give you an example of just how thick and fast these occur. But this is the job, open brackets. The life of a bounty hunter offers a great deal of watching and waiting. Those long stretches accompanied by very short, sharp bursts in action. Second example, comes after or while Jas is equipping a unipod to a weapon, open the brackets. It gives the rifle that little extra stability, especially in unstable positions such as this, hanging 100 or so meters in the air, staring out over the sprawling city. You can clearly see here that these are unnecessary explanation of what's already been sort of very clear. The book begins with the following sentence: now. Page 20 includes this gem: then. And this is because the colon appears everywhere. Randomly, bafflingly, pointlessly, colon, probably because this book has already passed through Wendig's, and that is the only explanation for passages like this one. Running now, not walking. Someone calls after her, Ardia. But then another voice, Pandion too, ahead, the stairway and doorway to the landing ring. Or this one, in here, an Imperial Star Destroyer bay. Now this you might think is dialogue, but it's not. This is from the narrative. But there are indicators of how bad this is going to get right at the start. This is from the very first scene, irrelevant to the rest of the novel, where Imperial police on Coruscant are suppressing the celebrations of Palpatine's death. About halfway through the scene we have this classic line. Two of those gathered, a father and son, Rorak and Jack, quick duck behind the collapsed statue. Now the scene to this point is completely impersonal because these are the only named characters and they're introduced here, which like I say is about halfway through. Then we have this abomination, this quick duck. Now if Wendig was writing about rapid waterfowl, this is no problem, but what you have here is a verb and what you have here is an adjective. And you should be using an adverb to modify a verb. There's a clue there. Now I'm mansplaining, not to anyone watching, because I assume if you're smart enough to work the buttons on your YouTube thing, you already know this. But as the above quotes indicate, Chuck himself is not above being a patronising arse, and as an author, he really ought to know this stuff. But he actually repeats this again in the text. On page 89, he quick pops it to his other hand so nobody can see. And 99, he hops off the stool, then quick darts back to the bar. But we'll go back to page 8, and the very same paragraph that the quick ducks appears in ends like this. In the distance, the sound of more fighting, a plume of smoke, flashes of blaster fire. A billboard high up in the sky among the traffic lanes suddenly goes to static. The first line here is overdoing the short punchy sentence to create tension technique. The reason this fails is because this is actually a string of phrases. Now this is common in a screenplay where the intent is to indicate imagery and sound, but we should expect more in the novel form. What's missing here is there isn't actually a single verb. There is nothing happening or being done, so there's no sense of action. The second line flubs the whole thing anyway, and exposes quite simply that Wendig is a poor writer. His inconsistency blows the scene. We have almost the same amount of words in this sentence as in the first one, but without a single piece of punctuation. The juxtaposition of the four fragmented phrases with one lengthy sentence makes the pace uneven. None of it is evocative, imaginative, or does anything interesting anyway, and this is in an action scene no less. But Wendig, when he discovers a scab, he has to keep picking at it. Here's some equally awful action from later in the book. Banging, a thud, blaster fire, another bang, 3 more blaster shots in quick succession, someone mewling in pain, 1 more shot, the mewling ends, cut off as fast as it began. Gee, Earl Grey, hot. But Wendig can do the poetic function when he wants to, or perhaps entirely by accident, depending on how much faith you have in him, as indicated in this passage from page 212. Searing bolts, splinters spray, smoke drifts through the holes, the stormtroopers stop struggling and lie still. My God, that's hard to say. That is some of the most brutal sibilance I've ever experienced outside of my one term of Parselmouth lessons. But of all the horrors wrought by Wendig on the reading public, there is one that stands head and shoulders above the rest as utterly unforgivable. On page 237, Nora tells us that TIE fighters don't have ejector seats. This is the second time she's made that assertion. It's fairly important because the ship then crashes and explodes. Temin's mourning of his mother is interrupted by her sitting down beside him and saying, "Turns out TIE fighters have an ejector seat after all." Another stolen TIE fighter explodes with her inside it, and then she's gone. But we've been fooled once, and as Socrates once said, a fooled man can't get fooled again. So it's just as well we no longer believe Wendig, because page 356 begins with this, and then she's back, which if Wendig could stick to his own rules would actually be, then she's back. But either way, it's appalling. Not to be excluded from the family games, her son Temin is thrown off a tall building. Wendig writes, "Temin is dead. He's sure of it." It's incredibly gutless and its execution is beyond weak. Had either of them made some sort of sacrifice, it might have felt like this story had some stakes, but as mentioned above, it doesn't. It's low-ranking Imperials gathering on an insignificant world for a no-consequence meeting. Meanwhile, a small group of rebel nobodies does nothing and achieves little. And the 4 nobodies that Wendig pins this book on are simply the nails in each corner of its coffin. Nora was a rebel pilot in the fringes of the battle over Endor. She's utterly traumatized by events there, but they make no difference to her. She shrugs off the painful memories to pull off miraculous maneuvers and save her ship in the first scene that we see her. After this, the trauma is not really brought up again. It's rather like Wendig simply forgot he'd introduced the idea to begin with. She's come home from the war to rescue her son from a situation he doesn't need or want rescuing from. They bicker a bit, but it's thankfully not developed enough to become particularly irritating. Still, it's not easy to care about them either way. And Nora's son Temin makes killer robots covered in the remnants of corpses for a hobby. As a business, he sells droid parts and supports a thriving black market in weapons. Temin's problem is he's an anachronistic Earth teenager stuck in a Star Wars book. Here are some examples of his dialogue to show what I mean. You should go and save your friend, Wedgie or whatever. I know you think you're not being loud, but you're totally being loud. Whatever, Mum's fine, and if she's not, whatever. I mean, really, this is only missing a like. Whatever, Mum's fine, and if she's not, whatever. Hey guys, Temin says, giving a fake laugh. Is this not the 12:30 space bus to the Orwellian Cluster Casino? No? Oh, awkward. Then we have Sinjir, a former Imperial loyalty officer, now a drunk and a drifter. He contributes nothing much to the actual plot, but plenty to the portrayal of Wendig as a complete hack. This is from his first appearance, in which he kills 4 stormtroopers with his bare hands while drunk. Then, whistling, he traipses out the front of the cantina. The whistling suggests a nonchalance, so why pair it with traipse, which suggests weariness? Juxtaposition? The portrayal of Sinjir as this mixture of the irreconcilable, some sort of enigma? I don't buy it. If the idea was to portray Sinjir as the cool rogue that the alcoholism, the nonchalant attitude and the fighting chops suggest, then why not say strolled or even sauntered? As Wendig is a fan of the horribly anachronistic, why not swaggered? This trend continues with Sinjir when we see him next. My name is Marcus Kozin, a name he just made up right there on the spot. That's actually in the narrative. Kozin is a family name, distant on his mother's side. Marcus is, well, he really did just make that one up. We know, and because the ... pause here in the dialogue telegraphs that so badly, so does the guy you're trying to lie to. There's more from later in the book as well. Please brace yourself, because this one is genuinely awful. Sinjir is fighting a creature called a Herglick, described as being a huge shiny creature. Tiny eyes and a massive head, no neck. Tiny teeth and a massive maw, no chin. God help us if we've reached the point where you can write like that and get published. It's repetitive, it's so basic and dull, but this isn't the worst bit, because despite this description, Sinjir tries to strangle it. This is what happens. He flips around, trying like hell to get his arms around the creature's neck, but oops! No such neck exists. And never one to not overuse a horrible concept. Wendig uses this oops again. A stormtrooper asserts to Sinjir, don't get any funny ideas. And the narrative says, Sinjir is nothing but funny ideas. So oops, sorry, too late. I read this book. When Sinjir leaves the cantina after his first appearance, he's left a smattering of damage and a pile of corpses. It's Wendig's opportunity to up his character's cool, while also demonstrating his own ability for a classic snappy one-liner, something along the lines of, sorry about the mess. This is what he goes with. Somebody's going to have to clean that up. Ah, good luck with that. Why is this a question? Regardless, as Harrison Ford so famously said, you can write this shit, but you can't say it. The last of the Scooby Gang is Jas the bounty hunter, by far the most tolerable, yet, like Sinjir, she's hamstrung with a truly dreadful introduction. She curses herself for falling into a familiar trap. She operates too often with blinders on. She sees the target and makes a beeline for it, and sometimes when she does that, she misses things, a bigger picture, unseen enemies, complications. The view of the scope is all the view she needs, or so she believes until reality proves otherwise. So would we be getting a Boba Fett movie if we replaced no disintegrations with this? No disintegrations. Oh, and don't fall into that familiar trap. You know how you operate too often with blinders on. You see the target and make a beeline for it, and sometimes when you do that, you miss things. The bigger picture, unseen enemies, complications. Remember, the view of the scope is not all you need, and you only believe that until reality proves otherwise. I think the answer's no. Tea, Earl Grey, hot. It's also worth mentioning at this point that Jazz's mission is to assassinate an Imperial banker. So now we also know that in Wendig's world, the galaxy's good guys, the New Republic, supposedly a fresh start from Imperial oppression, are hiring murderers of their own. Admiral Sloane, a rare female in the heavily masculine Imperial military, gets the following treatment. Rey steps into her uniform, smoothing out the wrinkles. At least that's one good thing the humidity gives her. And her hair actually looks sort of amazing for the first time in how many years? I don't profess very often to knowing how women think, but if I was a woman and I was feeling empowered by the positioning of Sloane among the patriarchal Imperial Admiralty, a sentence like that might well temper that feeling somewhat. So, in conclusion, is this the worst book I've ever read? I want to say no, because as much of a mess he makes of things, Wendig has tried to do something different with his narrative. But it is very, very close anyway. In the past, writers like Alan Dean Foster and Timothy Zahn have written books for Star Wars. These are people with a proven track record and undeniable talent. Looking at Wendig's history, I can't see what it was that made Disney give him this job that he seems to have no real credentials for. But then Wendig, on this evidence, simply has no business being in print, let alone running amok in such a huge franchise, God I hate that word, as Star Wars. Aftermath's characters are lifeless and lacking anything that feels like a genuine motivation or a rounded personality. The action is dumb, implausible, and occasionally stupid, such as when Jazz surfs a corpse through the city streets, for example. No, I'm not joking about that. Wendig's narrator is inconsistent technically, and feels smug enough to be annoying rather than interesting. The whole book serves little purpose beyond introducing an unnamed fleet admiral in the epilogue, who will no doubt serve as the villain going forward. There are hints here that they might be something of a Thrawn-like figure, but as I'd have to read another book by Wendig to find out, that isn't going to happen. The only reason for recommending this book to anybody would be to share the pain. If you want to read it despite all I've said, I'd recommend tracking down a translation in a language you don't speak. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it more that way.